Welcome back to the program. Joining me now is foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, good evening to you. As we've talked about, Australia has joined Britain and Canada in officially recognising a Palestinian state. That comes with future steps like opening embassies and establishing diplomatic ties. I want to get your thoughts in a moment, but first, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused the leaders of the three countries of rewarding terrorism and insists there will be no Palestinian state. Here's what he said.
I
have a clear message to those leaders who recognise a Palestinian state after the terrible massacre of October 7th. You are giving a huge prize to terrorism. And I have another message for you. It will not happen. There will be no Palestinian state west of the Jordan.
So, Greg Sheridan, is the Israeli Prime Minister right? Has our government rewarded terrorism with this move?
Well, James, it's great to be with you. A few things to disentangle, really. I think the Albanese government has made a mistake and it has rewarded Hamas, and Hamas hailed it today as a great victory. It's important to remember that we have absolutely no influence in the Middle East. So what the Albanese government is doing is purely performative and utterly hollow. I do think it's disturbing for Benjamin Netanyahu to say there will never, ever be a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. I mean, that wasn't his position even a few years ago, and you'd have to hope that you would eventually get normalisation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and that there will be a Palestinian state in due course after proper negotiation and compromise. So my beef with the Albanese government is that you recognise a state when a state comes into existence, and making these kind of hollow performative gestures, it reinforces Hamas within the Palestinian world, because Hamas can say, look what terror achieved, and it tends to provoke that kind of reaction from the Israelis to say, well, if you're determining our future, we're not going to let you. But I think it was a very bad mistake by the Albanese government.
What do you make of Anthony Albanese's assertion that recognising Palestine is part of the peace process rather than a reward for peace? Do you think that's a reasonable strategy?
No, it doesn't make any sense at all. Why not recognise the Tibetan government in exile, or the Kurds in Syria and Iraq? I mean, they have as strong a moral case as the Palestinians for a state of their own. I mean, Tibet used to be an independent state. We've moved away from those kind of symbolic recognitions, and we recognise a new state when it comes into existence. But even in terms of the Albanese government's own policy, it's internally contradictory and incoherent, and which tells you that it's only gesture politics, because Albanese, in order to, appease a little bit the pro-Israel people in Australia, says, well, we're only doing this on strict conditions. The Palestinian Authority has to reform and has to have democratic elections, and there has to be Hamas having no role in the future of Gaza, and Hamas has to surrender all its weapons. Well, if you thought recognition had any meaning and those were your conditions, why not wait until those conditions are satisfied first? Because none of those conditions depends on Israel. The Palestinians could satisfy all those conditions tomorrow if they wanted to. Hamas could release the hostages tomorrow. It could say it's giving its weapons to the Palestinian Authority tomorrow. Palestinian Authority could reform tomorrow. It could hold elections tomorrow. But really, James, the whole thing... So I am myself critical of the Netanyahu government's policies at the moment, and I think they are bad policies. But I think the Albanese government is not just making a sound, reasonable criticism of the Netanyahu government. It's going into absurd fantasyland gesture politics, which it knows will have no effect. And the motive of it is not to have any effect in the Middle East. The motive of it is to have an effect in, marginal electorates where Labor is challenged by the Greens, and in some electorates where there are large numbers of Muslim voters. This is just domestic politics, foreign policy, domestic politics disguised as foreign policy.
Well, we'll see whether that works out or not, because a little later in the program, I'll show footage of pro-Palestinian protesters in Sydney marching through the CBD shouting, "We don't want two states. We want 1948. We'll get to that a little later. But another part of all of this is, of course, Anthony Albanese is in New York trying to organise a meeting with Donald Trump things already seem a bit tense between the two leaders. This announcement is certainly not going to help relations, is it?
No, I mean, it's all part of the Albanese government's move away from traditional Australian foreign policy. So it's the Albanese government which has completely smashed bipartisan Australian policy on Israel and the Palestinians. Australia has always supported a two-state solution, and I would certainly support that right now. But the two states have to come about as a result of compromise and negotiation. The Palestinians have been offered an independent state on at least 4 occasions historically on the most generous terms that you could ever imagine will ever be available from Israel, and they've rejected it at every turn. The extremists have, and the moderates haven't been brave enough to face them down. So it's the Albanese government which has smashed bipartisan Australian policy. It's done that to appease the left of its own party and outside its party. And more generally, its foreign policy is taking a leftward drift. Now, at the same time, it's got enough sense not to want to destroy the American alliance. So it's hoping to keep the American alliance going with the absolute bare minimum of action. No meaningful increase in defence spending, never saying boo to a goose about China, and so on. Meanwhile, it moves further left. You know, it makes great declarative gestures on climate policy, on Palestine. These are kind of fantasy policies which will never have any effect in the physical universe, whereas the one area where it has profound national responsibility, the South Pacific, it's failed dismally. It announced a defence treaty with Papua New Guinea before it was signed, and the Papua New Guinea cabinet won't endorse it. It announced a security deal with Vanuatu before it was signed, and the Vanuatu government has walked away from it. Those are 2 huge victories for China and 2 huge defeats for Australia, and that's the only bit of foreign policy where what the Albanese government says or does actually means something. I mean, no wonder they want to run away from the South Pacific and just indulge in their fantasy undergraduate politics about the Middle East, because nobody takes Australia seriously on the Middle East. So it kind of, in a sense, it has no consequence. It might have a consequence with Trump. It might further annoy Trump, who knows? But in reality, Australia has no influence and no responsibility for the Middle East. So Albanese can promise anything he likes. He can offer a Palestinian delegation to Mars or anything he likes. It won't make any difference.
Greg Sheridan, please do not give Anthony Albanese any ideas. Appreciate you joining me tonight. Thanks so much.